Now to an update on those submarines out of the US and a fair bit more that's happening around the globe. Joining me now is Strategic Analysis Australia Director, Michael Shoebridge. Michael, great to have your company. Good news, of course, coming out of the US. There was some opposition to AUKUS, we know, within the Democrats and also the Republicans, I might add. What's changed and when can we expect to get these Virginia-class into the water in Australia?
Well, Peter, it is good news. I think what's changed is the AUKUS deal is attached to the Pentagon's annual budget, and Congress doesn't want to get in the way of that. There's strong support for AUKUS in Congress, but really to talk about what's happening next week with this law going through Congress, like it's the AUKUS equivalent of the Apollo moon landings, I think is just wrong. This is one small step for mankind, but it's not a giant leap for AUKUS. There would be 8 more years where future Congresses can stop this deal. And the reason there was any trouble this year, not even 2.5 years in, is the Americans have started to realise the enormous challenges they face producing enough submarines for themselves. And that challenge is just going to get worse right up to the point when we want them to give us the first one. So really good news, but it's a job of work every year from now, and Australia has to pull its weight.
This is why I love having you on the show, Michael, because you haven't drunk the Kool-Aid. You are right to remind us that every single year this is something we've got to keep fighting for. And honestly, until we see subs in the water, I won't believe we've got AUKUS. It's not good enough just to have announcement after announcement. I want the boats in the water. Talk to me about this deal Australia signed with PNG during the week, $200 million. It's called a security agreement. We know there's been some tension in Bougainville. I'm keen on your analysis about what's happening to our north. And there's also this concern China brought a whole lot of, I think, police officers from the Pacific to a big meeting in Beijing. What's happening?
Well, Peter, you're right. There's a lot happening. It's a year and a half ago that China tried to get 10 Pacific nations to sign a big security pact and a free trade deal with it. It failed then, but it hasn't given up its ambition to play a big direct security role in our near region. So right while Australia has signed this fabulous security agreement with PNG, which isn't just about policing, it goes from defence to policing to border security to biohazards, and it's providing a whole lot of practical assistance to grow the PNG's police capacity. Right at this same time, China's continuing with its drive to play a much bigger role, and it's having a meeting in China of a whole lot of South Pacific police officers and even ministers. So it's making some gains. It tells us there's a real strategic arm wrestle going on in the South Pacific between Australia and China, but we've had some big important wins. The Bougainville thing is very interesting, and it shows the level of literacy in the Albanese government on PNG is pretty low. Mr. Albanese needed to understand that talking about supporting PNG on Bougainville is a clangor in Bougainville. The Bougainvillians want independence, and they're terrified that the PNG government isn't going to give it to them.
Let's go to the UN because the Secretary-General there, Antonio Guterres, has invoked Article 99 of the UN Charter, and he's invoked it for the first time in decades. It will allow him, and I quote, to bring to the attention of the Security Council any matter which, in his opinion, may threaten the maintenance of international peace and security. He's out pretty hard today calling for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza. We've just gone through a ceasefire and got some of those hostages out. That's ended. Obviously, conflict fighting has commenced again. I'm not so sure Guterres is any friend of Israel, and this feels to me as he's looking to find cover for Hamas. What do you think?
Well, Peter, I think you are spot on, and I think the problem is that a UN resolution or a UN Security Council resolution on this, which I think the Americans would have to veto, is like one hand clapping. The UN is only talking to member states, only to Israel. Mr. Guterres knows Hamas is not listening, will not hold by a ceasefire. They didn't hold by the temporary truce that we've just experienced recently. So it's all about pressuring Israel and letting Hamas off the hook. Now, the humanitarian situation is dire. Something different needs to happen, but a ceasefire is not going to happen and Hamas is an existential threat to Israel.
Last week on this show, we talked about the New York Times report that the Israeli government was warned about a year out from the 7th of October attacks. They dismissed the warning, though. They didn't think it was plausible that Hamas could do what they did. Reports, though, today, and I think these are more damaging, that the government was aware, or the IDF was aware, of sort of unusual activity on the day that things occurred. So the unusual activity was on the border. I think the time was about 3 a.m. Again, they dismissed it. I think out of this, there's going to be a huge reckoning for intelligence and security agencies, not just in Israel, but I suspect across the board.
Peter, it's a horrible reminder that when you're doing intelligence assessment, you cannot just turn the handle and accept all the assumptions you've made before. It's very hard to keep fresh eyes so that you notice real changes and pay attention to them and don't discount them because they don't fit with your previous view. A bit of that looks like it happened here. That's very familiar. The 9/11 story is the same. But I think the clean out of Israel isn't just going to be about intelligence and security agency officials. It's going to be the government. And really, in the post-war Israel, we can expect very different leadership.